Alright, trying to sync face cam and audio. Actually, no, syncing face cam with what's being displayed on the monitor. This really isn't entirely necessary because it's... I mean, I guess it's kind of necessary. Fuck it, I'm just gonna sync it anyway. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And then I'll do another sync test at the end. You know, it's entirely... I don't know, this was... As you can tell, I'm very prepared for this. Hi, how are you? This is the start of a kind of series. I do a lot of kind of series things on this channel. Some are more prolific than others. Some are more not successful than others. I don't know. I can't really gauge success because the engagement per video is incredibly limited, even for the amount of technical audience I have. So I can't really gauge things based on success, but what I can do is I can just keep trying multiple different things in hopes that something will actually hit a spot to latch and anchor as to form a sort of baseline. And what you're seeing today is actually another attempt. I've kind of done it before by doing shorts, sound bites of me narrating stuff. And I actually got this new microphone relatively recently, and in a bid to attempt to sort of get more used to using this and talking more clearly and projecting my voice actually out in a way that is kind of understandable, I thought of a series called Scripted Madness, and what that was is basically I go through the backlog of all the videos all the backlog of all the random stories I've written over the years, and then I just sort of read them out to you in a way that is kind of indicative of an audiobook. I don't know why I struggled so hard to figure out that sentence. As you can tell, this series is going to go great. So this is pretty much the loose pilot episode of that sort of scripted madness idea. I did plan to do a much bigger thing with getting in a bunch of friends to do separate voice acting, but that was a case of trying to achieve more than what was necessary when all I really needed to do was get a story and have it read vocally out loud to an audience. And I can pretty much do that by myself at 1:46 in the morning because I can't sleep. So we're going to do that now. What you're seeing on screen right here is a story that I wrote, a short story that I wrote around, I think, 2016. It was... There's fucking ghosts in this place. So what you're seeing right here is a short story that I wrote, I want to say around 2016, possibly going into 2017. It was around the same time. Frankly, it was actually the exact same time of Star Wars The Force Awakens, the beginning of the prequel trilogy, and it is, in fact, a fan sort of concept based in the Star Wars universe, called Sabre Origins. Very creative name, by the way. And the base concept came from the sort of vision that Rey had when she touched Anakin's lightsaber for the very first time. It was sort of like topsy-turvy, semi-kaleidoscopian landscape where she gets vague warnings about the future and also tangential connections to characters in the outer spectrum of Star Wars that at the time she didn't logically need and would prove later that she definitely did not need. But that's like bashing the sequel trilogy aside. That's not what this video is about. This video is about reading my shitty fan fiction. But so yeah, and the actual the original concept before I put this sort of basic, let's see, this basic 4-page story to paper was a sort of hybrid mini-series that I wanted to also do into a comic. I have a lot of ambition that bears very little fruit, by the way. And the whole spectrum of the miniseries was like a small collection of individuals from the Clone Wars prior to Order 66 that sort of got sectioned off during an ion storm or some sort of cosmological event, and were then stuck in a part of the galaxy that hadn't necessarily been colonized or explored by the larger Republic or Outer Rim territories. Which, by the way, if you actually look at Star Wars's whole like galaxy map, it is a mess. Like you like half the entire region of space is unexplored for good reason. By the way, there's a lot of weird stuff in the Star Wars universe, and all that weird stuff is the reason half the galaxy isn't explored. And so the entire premise of the story is that this isolated section of individuals who would be by default sort of members of the Grand Galactic Military of the Republic. I'm getting my terms crossed. They would sort of just be stuck in this sort of pocket, segregated away from all the stuff that happened prior to Order 66, and that was my way, or at post Order 66, and that was my way of sort of saying, yeah, I can write whatever I want, and I don't have to follow the Star Wars mythos. But yeah, that idea eventually fell by the wayside, and it sort of laid pretty much in the grave for several years up until I decided to pick up this series again. And I dug through my Google Drive and I found this document here that is the short story that I wrote to sort of try to gauge interest and to see if, like, because the original plan for me writing this was to see if enough of my friends were interested, and a few were, but it was one of those cases where personally I felt it wasn't enough to actually engage more with it, and that was honestly a bad decision on my part, because I don't really need people's approval to do stuff that I have an interest, to like make stuff and do things that I have a personal interest in. Like that, no one is telling me that I can't sit down and write terrible fan fiction about a franchise that I like that is most likely going to sue the shit out of me should I try to actually produce something from this. But yeah, enough like wasting time. I'm probably going to have to cut that down a little bit so it's a little bit more concise. Enough wasting time. We're just going to get into the story, and I'm just going to try to read it from the top of the page down to the top of the first page down to the last page as articulate. I'm just going to read this story, and if it sounds bad, I am not a voice actor, so you can't complain. Yeah, that's the message I should be putting forth. I should have grabbed water before I did this. Let me adjust my mic here so the audio is going to sound ever so slightly different. But, yeah, my audio setup is basically just my mic sitting on top of two boxes, one of which is for the mic itself, the other is for my Vike A30 drawing tablet. So yeah. Why am I hesitating to read this dumbass story? The temple had been abandoned for quite some time. The great structure was large and sturdy, but nevertheless the ravages of time cracked the tilework, the floors, and the masonry of the walls, until it looked just as wow, that is such a run-on sentence. We are off to a great start. My god. The temple had been abandoned for quite some time. The great structure was large and I'm probably going to have to go this sentence by sentence and just condense it together, which is going to look great on the webcam. The temple had been abandoned for quite some time. The great structure was large and sturdy, but nevertheless the ravages of time cracked the tile work of the floors and the masonry of the walls until it looked just as an unstable ruin does when it is ready to collapse and become nothing more than rubble in the land. The air of the temple was stale, dusty, and silent. For many years, the only sounds that could be attributed to life in the structure were the footfalls of rodents, small animals seeking shelter from larger ones. I hit my mic there for a second. On this day, the peaceful bliss of the temple was shattered by the footfalls of a larger presence. Through the vast halls of the temple, the soft thumping Through the vast halls of the temple, the soft thumping march of boots resonated through the halls. In the main hall, the boots grew louder and louder. The pace of the steps grew quicker. On this day, the peaceful bliss of the temple was shattered by the footfalls of a larger presence. Through the vast halls of the temple, the soft thumping march of boots resonated through the halls. In the main hall, the boots grew louder and louder. The pace of the steps grew quicker as well. The entity marching alone started from a patient walk into a feverish trot, faster to the main hall of the derelict. What doesn't help is that I haven't gone through and actually edited any of this. So what you're seeing is a very early form of my writing style, in which it is full of run-on sentences, repeated words, and stale delivery. Although the stale delivery comes from present day. Yeah, that's gonna sound good, me sighing into the mic real hard. The entity, marching alone, started from a patient walk into a feverish trot, faster to the main hall of the derelict temple. The footsteps stopped once Laverai entered the main hall. Just main halls all over the place. He had stopped his exciting sprint when his eyes fell onto the decrepit state of the ancient room. The tall statues lining the edges of the room, paying respect to the old masters, were now shattered, collapsed, and blown apart. The walls, ceiling, and floor were scarred by blaster fire and thermal grenades. The prideful banners of the order were rags hanging down from the skylight. To the hopeful Laverai, this was just another ruin. Laverai's communicator began beeping. He let it sound in the empty hall for some time as he slowly walked along toward the center. The notifying beeping seemed to comfort him whilst he took in his lonely surroundings. He would answer it eventually, and be greeted by the voice of his friend Layla. "Laverai, what's going on? You took off." Her voice was filled with concern. His voice seemed saddened and meek. "I'm sorry. I had another vision." "What did you see?" He sat down at the base of a ruined statue and fiddled with the scattered stones as he spoke. "It was this place. It was in its prime. Years ago when they stood... It was this place. I saw it in its prime, years ago when they still used it, and I saw young ones running up and down the halls. I wanted to follow them, to see what they were running to. Only I found there was nothing. Just another tomb. Just old ruins. Even when I write it, I still can't get the words right. Leverai, I'm sorry. Don't be. Leverai stands back up, taking with him a stone. You can head back to the ship. I want to be alone for a minute. Maybe a new vision will come, and this time it will give me some kind of answer. Okay. Call back when you're ready to leave. I will. With those words, Leverai deactivated his communicator and paced about the main hall. As he did, Leverai pitched the stone about the room. The small nut-sized object seemed to glide with great speed through the air, only to slow in its velocity and drift back to Leverai's palm. He would then pitch the stone again, and the action would repeat. Leverai continued this doing... Yeah, that's a sentence. Leverai continued doing this for some time until his eyes rested on the withered form of a statue. His arm was raised and ready to pitch the stone again, when he glanced up to his side. The statue's face was aged and crumpled by time. Chips about the brow and mouth seemed to shift from a constant blank expression to one of scrutiny. Leverai stared up with absent inquisition to the judgmental stonework. He then turned to anger. The inquisitive expression twisted and melted into that of fury and frustration. Leverai pitched the stone at the face of the statue, knocking off a sizable chunk of the already damaged face. The sound of the stone as it impacted onto the ground was loud, louder than any sound previously heard in the temple for years. The sound seemed to shake the very foundation of the room, as if the structure shuddered in remembrance to the ancient days of the Order's fall. The sound was followed by a yell, an almost defiant scream of anger, frustration, and fury. Leverai let his voice howl and distort across the bricks of the temple. He shouted to the heavens and to the earth. He screamed at the ghosts of the past and to the future visions. Leverai lamented his woes to the great structure and yelled again for a response. Why do you waste my time? You torment me with premonitions and illusions that I cannot fathom. All of them to this place of rubble and dust. I want to understand why I feel such things and why my thoughts and visions lead me only to feel more of these. Leverai stands in the center of the hall now. He reaches into his pocket and retrieves a shard of crystal, a ruby-colored gemstone that seems to glow with embers akin to Mustafar fire. I feel all things in the galaxy. I feel the sorrow. I feel the pain. I feel the agony of all the life of the worlds. And yet I feel happiness. I feel joy and all this suffering. I feel love and hate, and I can't understand why. Why am I a being that can sense things like this? Leverai's eyes welled, and he collapsed to his knees. The shouting had drained him, and he was crying into his palms. The crystal is glowing brighter now. Just tell me why. Just tell me what I am. The anger and frustration returned. It enveloped him. Leverai's eyes glowed. Leverai's eyes glossed over with a yellow fury. Just show me. The air in the room pulsed. Show me, tell me, and give me an answer. Tiles in the floor cracked and split. They drew jagged spiderweb lines back to Leverai as he knelt in the center. About him, the loose bricks and stones of the room began to tremble. I want to know! Leverai smashed his fists down into the ground. Sparks of lightning whipped from his arms in a wild spray. The lightning faded into a mist, a colorful fog. I'm going to go through that line again. The lightning faded into a misty, colorful fog. The fog painted the walls of the old temple into abstract representations of what the structure looked like in the earlier days of its life. All round Leverai, the sounds of battle raged. Blast of fire shattered against the stone walls, the temple, and against the sterling white armor of soldiers. Laverai could hear the burn of fabric as bolts hit their mark. He heard explosions and screams all around him. An orchestra of death whirled around him like a cyclone, all the while he listened to the playful, delightful pastime of children playing. When the vision passed, Laverai was again drawn to tears. "What am I?" "You sound like a fallen Jedi." Laverai, feeling ashamed, whipped away his tears. "Who's there?" he asked as he stood back onto his feet. The main hall was still, empty in the ruins. Laverai looked all around, down the adjoining halls and behind the still-standing statues. "Where are you? I know you're here. I heard you." Frustration crept back into his voice, though it was not as intense as it was before. "What did you say about me?" "I said you sound like a Jedi." "A Jedi?" The voice did not speak again. Laverai to determine where it came from. Laverai tried to determine where it came from. The silence of the temple did little to help. Laverai beckoned the voice to speak again to no avail. He tried and tried again, questioning the voice's accusation and questioning what it implied. Still the voice stayed silent. Laverai's frustration grew stronger, but subsided when he noticed the crystal began to glow hot in his hands. The crystal was small, approximately a fourth the size of Laverai's palm. The crystal seemed to pulse with a pinkish aura, and it shined. The crystal seemed to pulse with a pinkish aura, and it shined with the grace of a star. In the alluring luster of the gem, one could see their jagged reflections stare back at them with crooked intelligence. Laverai closed his fist around the crystal and held it to his chest. With a deep breath, he focused all around him. He focused on the stones of the temple, the stale air of the room, and the beat of life on the planet he was on. "You said I sounded like a Jedi." He openly addressed the voice again. "Tell me then. Who are you?" "I will tell you that I am a teacher." "A teacher? What kind of teacher?" The crystal shifted in Laverai's palm. It pulled itself towards something behind him. The small gemstone moved with the force to pull Laverai's arm out away from his chest and turn the man around. When he turned, Laverai let go of the crystal in surprise as there was a figure standing beside one of the statues. The crystal stopped to levitate in front of a figure's outstretched hand. Laverai watched the crystal float about the figure's hand. I'm really struggling. Laverai watched the crystal float about the figure's hand. More objects floated to join the crystal. A cylindrical pipe or rod, the heat cowling from a blaster, the buttons from a control panel, the heat coil from a small thruster, a light emitter, various clips and screws, and finally, a power cell of sorts. All these things came to orbit around the crystal as it floated. Laverai watched in silent awe as the objects... Laverai watched in silent awe at the floating objects. They began to click together, encasing the crystal in a perfect shell. The parts seemed to fit without flaw, like a puzzle. When each part finished joining, Laverai recognized the new device as a lightsaber. Ooh. I'll be honest, I don't know what I'm doing. As the figure took hold of the saber, Laverai stepped forward to ask, "Are you a Jedi?" The figure lowered the saber and gazed at Laverai with an oddly familiar sort of malice. The figure ignited the saber. The blood-red glow of the saber cast deathly ghoulish shadow across the room. The statues that stood in mocking judgment now stand in horrifying anger. A haunting glow bled from the saber and seemed to leach itself into Laverai. How cute. You think I am a Jedi. The vision disappeared from Laverai's sight. He looked around the room at a once again empty ruin. The crystal rested on the ground, free from the other objects that joined it into a saber. Laverai stared down at the glowing gem. It seemed to stare back at him. The end. So obviously, as a first outing into a semi-audiobook formatting, it could have gone better. But, start small, work your way up. I'd say this was decent enough practice, despite the fact that I basically just basically hobbled over each and every sentence as quickly as I could, and with not as much care as I probably should have done. But, I don't know if you found this interesting. Good for you. Thanks for appreciating my work. If you didn't find this interesting, whatever. There's more than 1,000 other people doing the exact same thing as what I'm doing. It's just, you happen to find me. In which case, thanks for the view. You probably only got about a minute into this after I read the first sentence. I'm beside myself whether I want to edit this down. I don't think I will. Because it's just, the edit is going to look far worse than if I just leave it completely raw. I'd say for the first proto version of doing this, it's fine. It really is. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. In later versions, though, I'll try to take more care. Well, suppose that's it. I hope you have a very nice time.